Good evening. First things first, it is selfie time. Yay. And I'm not taking a selfie with the please. You all are going to be in it, right?
No.
So let's see here. I think I can get everybody. So like,
Get those straight.
Now that we have the important part done. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I love coming to Grand Rapids and more speaker, right? I did come to chicken, all the chicken, all the chicken. I had chicken following me today. I gave them fresh fries. Oh, they were really happy because they like following me all over. To get a test. But anyway, as my daughter's walking around, I have some stuff for you. Hopefully you all can enjoy it as I get back. I'm extremely organized. I'm extremely put together, and I have a really strong agenda. So I should have here about 3 hours. Together. So don't know who I am. I really know who I am here. But just a little bit about who I am. I guess I'm Jaime Jo Wright. My daughter Chloe introduced me. I am from Wisconsin, and I grew up in Wisconsin. My dad lived in U.P. for a while, so we like to play Michigan. So we got that in our family past. And I live out in the woods with nobody around. It's great. And we have 4 cats. I'm the cat lady. Starting early. I figure by the time I'm in my 90s, I'll have about 25 at goal. And we also have a salamander that lives in my son's room. And we have probably 30-some fish. And we have hermit crabs. I'm trying to think of what else we have. I think that's it. We've had a litany of strange amphibious reptilian things come to our house right now. But that's to get me to live in the country, right? Can you all hear me okay? So tonight I just thought it would be fun to chat a little bit about the Vanishing Castle Moreau, which comes out the 4th, but apparently it's on the shelf now. So that's pretty cool. Go Baker. Go Baker. Never cheerleader in this class. We're bad at that. You know, it was really fun to write The Vanishing at Castle Moreau, and I'll share a little bit about where the ideas came from. I also want to make sure I have time for questions too, because it's probably easier than me to standing up here talking forever. But The Vanishing at Castle Moreau started with Sue Paul from Grand Rapids. When I texted her on my phone, she's like, I don't think I was listening. Texted her on my phone, I said, I need an idea for a book. I can't think of anything, which is an unusual thing for an author. So usually when you have this moment of, I don't know what to write about, you're like, my career's over. It's done. I have no more stories left in me. And Sue goes, no, I have to tell you the story about this Hungarian female serial killer. There was a woman, her name was, I don't know how you pronounce it, but it looks like it's pronounced Elizabeth Bathory. And she was a Hungarian countess in the late 1600s. And she, you know, some people know who she is. There was actually a movie made about her that George been watching, although I watched part of it in English. But she lived in a castle. She married young, and she lived in a castle, and her husband went off to war. So please come along with the ladies waiting and housekeepers and all that. And she decided, let's see what it would be like if we just somebody. This is what we all think, right? No. So she made a hobby of inviting women from nearby towns and communities who were not to be rude, but they weren't gentry or noble. They were like no-name women, and they would just, and nobody would know what happened to them. The last they knew, they thought they went up to the Countess's castle, but who knows? They just disappeared. Eventually, Elizabeth got tired of slaughtering no-names, and she started inviting gentry, young women and women to her castle, and eventually doing away with them, and was eventually caught after they say she probably killed upwards of a couple hundred females, and there's a whole bunch of other things I won't go into that is really gruesome. But she went down as history's first known female serial killer, and that's what inspired the Vanishing. So that's gave me that lovely and edifying idea. I emailed my editor. I said, Castle, Wisconsin, serial killer, disappearing women. What do you think? She goes, you better review this. Because I don't know how you're going to pull this off, but you better review this. So anyway, that's kind of what started giving me the idea. So I had the idea of what kind of Castle set in the Midwest was best. Was the board. That's the stage that it's the trick. So yeah, anyway, so let's think about we need to have a castle set in the Midwest, right? That's not usual, unless you're thinking White Castle, which are more the other side. And so Castle in the Midwest, and then I wanted to do something I want to rip off the district completely, and yeah, that is pretty gruesome, right? So let's not go quite that crazy. So I decided, wouldn't it be cool if you had somebody who was like an older woman who was responsible for writing Gothic horror novels set in the 19th century, right? Like Mary Shelley grew up writing those types of books. So she kind of goes down to like this classic American author, and then her family over time, bringing it up to present day, is kind of like this aristocratic American family species, like the Kennedys, right? Everybody knows who the Kennedys are. Let's do that. Typical rating of the castle, very horror novels, and thought we're going to have a castle with a history of women who disappeared, never to be seen again. But instead of it just happening in one generation, we're going to start it when the castle was first built, and it's going to go all the way up to present day. What's going on in the castle that makes women disappear? How many have gone missing over there? So assuming most of you have not read the book, so I won't spoil it for you. But we'll leave that question hanging. But it was a fun book to write from the standpoint of trying to figure out all the ins and outs of how to pull this off. When you have over a century of time, you can't have one villain, one person making these women disappear. And seeing that I'm running for the Christian market, anything that's quote unquote paranormal healing is not really paranormal. We're going to have to explain this humanly speaking too. It's not really going to be a ghost. It's tough to do, right? She comes off. I mean, there's human. It'd be a lot easier if I wrote actual ghost stories. Trust me. It's pretty hard to explain ghosts and do stuff. Okay. You too. But so it was fun to try and figure all of that out and put those pieces together. And then I was like, oh yeah, this book should mean something, right? We should actually write a story that means something. That's always one of the things that I like to do for books, is I like to write something that, yes, you can read it for an entertainment purpose, you can read it for fun and enjoyment, But you're also going to come away with it either hopefully gaining something that will either encourage you spiritually, or if you don't have a spiritual background, maybe make you question, what can God offer you? What is there out there beyond what we see right in front of us physically here from our kids? So not really going to the Frank Freddy type thing where I mean the spiritual world is spiritual warfare, but I do believe very strongly that there's a veil between us and what God has kind of just hidden out of view, which is eternity and the perfection that is his plan for our future as followers of Christ. And I think it's just really neat to constantly think about the great cloud of witnesses that come for us. They cheer us on. Those aren't the creepy ghosts people. Those are the people that are, whether they see us now or whether they're just up there cheering us on from afar. Who knows? But it's exciting to me to think that King David is standing next to my mom right now, right? And cheering us on, And so those are the things that are exciting. And I want after death to be just as real as now for my readers. I get a lot of readers saying, why do you write about death? Because death doesn't have to equal darkness. And we so often, even as believers, equated death to this horribly bitter thing or this horribly dark process. And yes, it says in Psalms, yea, that I walk in the valley of the shadow of death. But it also says, I will fear no evil. Right? And so often we focus on the yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, period. And it just becomes this really dark place. But there's hope at the end of that verse, right? And so that's what I hope to do with my stories, is to take people to the concept of death or grief or mayhem or chaos or trouble and trial, and you kind of mimic or parallel what that has in store for our spiritual lives, and bring out the pinpricks of hope that can become blinding when we start looking at it and going, wow. There's way more than what we see in this world, and there's way more to hope for, the things that have not yet come, right? So as I'm looking at the Castle Moreau, I'm like, okay, how do I do that with disappearing women and Gothic Mary Shelleys and creepy castles and So, trying to bring your attention. And one of the things that I got to do is when I was little, you won't believe this. You were shy. I don't know. No, I was never shy. But I was in. And I wanted to dye my hair red, and she's the whole lot against her. But everything romantic I could get my hands on. I was a massive Tracy here, and now I text her, which is really surreal. That's like a fangirl moment that we have her over version for. You're like, what? But anyway, that's a side. You grow up and you watch, whether it's Disney or other things like that, there's the princess, right? And there's the castle, right? So we have the castle up there. And we have the villain, which is usually the dragon or the little evil witch. And then there's Prince girl. You grow up and you realize those fairy tales are not quite up to where we thought they were going to be. And Prince Charming is not necessarily Prince Charming. And so that was my question with Vanishing and Castle Moreau. What happens when your fairy tale castle and your Prince Charming and your white knight and your place of refuge becomes a place of monsters and darkness, and that castle is no longer beautiful, but that castle is a place of secrets and abuse and things are not friendly. What happens when those dreams are crushed, right? Where do you go? What becomes a refuge at that point in time? And so I started doing a little bit of a study, kind of as I went, as I wrote the book, I was studying the concept of a refuge. And I love the movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, because he would go into the church and he would cry sanctuary, right? And sanctuary in the church was a place where no harm could be done to you, hypothetically, supposed to be. And so I love that concept of that sanctuary, that refuge. And one of the things that became really, really clear in writing the story, and I want to share this as much as I can without giving spoilers away, is rescue and refuge are two very different things. Okay? If you think about it, rescue and refuge are very different. Rescue is when you are removed from a dangerous situation or a trial or a tribulation. You're removed from it and it no longer affects you. You have been saved from it. Okay? Refuge is what's given to you during the storm so that you can still walk through the storm. Okay? Refuge is the umbrella, so to speak, trying to be dry while it's raining. A refuge is a place to get some rest, but you haven't left the battle. Okay? Refuge is not a removal from your tribulation. It's an opportunity to rest and find security while the storm is still raging, and you must still go through that storm. And that was the question I was asking myself when it came down to the Vanishing at Castle Moreau, was what is the refuge in this story? Because different characters that you'll meet in this book are women with varying degrees of abusive pasts. All right? Some of them not so dramatic, some of them more dramatic. We all have experienced abuse from each other in one way or another. All right? But we're human, and human is at the root sinful and evil, and it doesn't matter who you are, you experience some sort of abuse from someone. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, small, huge. So anybody who hears the word refuge can relate to concept, their own personal experience, and wanting to find refuge away from whatever's hurting them, whatever doesn't understand them, whatever has excluded them, whatever has put them into a different category or a different place. And so I have my main character in the present day. Her name is Cleo, and she's coming to the castle because she's taken a job to help the woman who lives in the castle. She lives alone, and she's a porter. All right. Here's a woman who lives in a castle, and she's a porter. And Cleo has basically put herself in her own self-defined form of WISAC. She's like in her own little protection program, like, right? She doesn't want her family to know where she's at. She's got a credit card. She's got her cell phones. She has taken herself off from that. But you don't really know why, but you know something has happened. And she is afraid of someone. And I honestly got through about halfway through the book, writing it, before I realized who she was afraid of. And her abuser, little spoiler, maybe a little spoiler, her abuser is herself. Okay? And then we have the past, where we have Daisy, who's an orphan. She answers an advertisement, which is very cryptic, asking for something with no strings attached to come work at the castle. She gets to the castle, and this is where she meets Castle Moreau, who is the Gothic authoress and very unfriendly. And she has a secret in the upstairs study that is very dark. There's also rumors of the woman with the crooked hand that occasionally appears from nowhere and disappears, never to be seen again. And what are their stories? And then, when Cleo gets to the castle in present day, she discovers the story of another girl named Anne who disappeared in the early 90s. And she's the last known woman to disappear on the property of Castle Moreau. And she really doesn't care until she gets sucked in. Somebody wants her to solve the mystery now that we know she's at Castle Moreau. And while she does that, she starts to unveil the entire story of this really dark place called Castle Moreau. And in the meantime, is trying to find refuge and sanctuary. So that's the story of Vanishing Castle Moreau. I would love to spoil it. I would love to tell you how it ends. But then I would sell no books for Baker Book House. Really mad. She's like, wait, you ruined it all. So, but that's really, as you read it, if you decide to read it, that's really the thrust of the story in my heart is that we can all find our refuge and know that refuge is promised. God's promised us a refuge. And as much as I hate to say it, very rarely do I see him rescue. Okay? More often than not, he asks us to walk through the fire and the flame. The Old Testament is filled with stories of refuge, not a lot of rescue. All right? I mean, you can look at the Jews leaving Egypt, Hebrews people leaving Egypt as rescue, but really it wasn't. It was pretty awful, hard tribulation coming out of slavery. There was lots of miracles that happened, but I would say those were their refuges. All right. And then you look at the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego going into a fiery furnace, and Daniel getting thrown into the lion's den, and you can go on and on with the stories of refuge that God provided, but again, did not remove the trial. And so as I write this book and as readers read this book, I really pray that they can equate what's happening in the book to their own walk with God and ask him, where is my refuge? And in the asking, be reminded when he answers, I am. Okay? Because when Moses asked, who do I tell Pharaoh is sending me? What was God's answer? I am. And if you know how powerful that is to an Egyptian Pharaoh, where including the Pharaoh is considered a god, to hear the words, I am, period. I am. I'm above all. I am. Right? And so when you hear the words I am, and I am is in your corner, in your tribulation, walking you through, you can be guaranteed that refuge in the midst of the storm. And that's the backstory, the spiritual themes of the Vanishing. So, any questions?
Are you a pantser where you just kind of started pulling things together and writing? Or, I'm sorry.
No, you're right.
Are you a pantser?
Pull it really close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Are you the pantser where you just start throwing things together and just sort of out and nail the knots? Or do you actually sit down and plot all this out and sort it out and shuffle your scenes?
I get asked that question a lot, and I don't even know how to describe it. I tell people don't write books the way I write books. Really don't. I see books in my head like a movie. Okay. And so every time I rewatch the movie in my head, I see more clearly. If that makes sense. Yeah. Like you watch a movie once and you watch it a second time, you see more things happen. So the book that I just turned into my editor today, which comes out next spring, that one, I have 6 months to write a book. Okay. And that one I actually physically started writing the words on paper about 3 weeks ago. That's why I say don't do what I do if you want to write. But I've seen the movie of that book probably every day for the last 4 or 5 months. So I don't want to say that I'm a full-on fodder or pantser. I'm just kind of one of those people that watches the movie a full awful lot. And then when I start writing the book, I go, oh, we can throw this in there, or oh, we can throw this in there. And then there's unanswered questions, like with the Vanishing. I was still kind of confused, even when I sat down to write that, who Cleo is running from in the present day. And it was only halfway through, I'm like, oh, duh, herself. She's the problem. Okay, there's just something that's me. Okay. All right, that's a big yearly. Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? One back. Oh,
Well, it's not really a question, but I have seen progression in your writing, and I really want to encourage you because every book is better than the previous one.
that's true, because I've actually got decreased deadlines. And one of the things as a reader, I'll notice sometimes as authors start producing books faster, it's like they have less time to build their story, and so sometimes you feel like the story maybe suffers a little. So that's actually encouraging. So I'm always scared that it's going to get worse. This is my career in the novel people.
They're so good. I can hardly.
Oh, I really appreciate it. I have a question.
So I got a question.
Yeah.
So, because part of this came from history, 1600s to 7. How much do you go back into research about those times? Because I just have a sense that that could be a rabbit hole. We try to relate that to contemporary times.
Yeah.
Themes that kind of cross. So how do you stay yourself away from, chasing every rabbit?
Very difficult sometimes. But the one thing I'm always careful, and I'm not, I need to qualify too, write in historical times, but I am not a historical writer, if that makes sense. So I will use history as the background. But even in the sake of Elizabeth Bathory, for example, as I started going down the rabbit trail, you start learning that not only was she accused of over 400 murders, they never really found evidence either. So some people argue that maybe she never really did. And so you wonder how much gets shifted through history of what really happened versus what is being told happened. And that's a rabbit trail you can really go down and get lost in. So I will do it to a degree. And then I usually take a step back and go, what can I use from this and learn from what I've read that I can incorporate into the story, staying as accurate to history as possible if it's an actual historical event or person that I'm representing. In this case, it was more inspiration from that story, not so much retelling. And honestly, I will glean what I need to, and then I will just focus on writing, because otherwise I would still be researching and managing at Castle Moreau, because it is a fascinating time period. I mean, where Elizabeth Bathory came from, I mean, the time period, and she was married off at 14. She had no choice in the matter. The things that she probably had to endure her own self was probably horrific on other levels. And there's so many stories like that throughout history. And does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's great. Yes. That is great, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are watching for you. Yes. How many go on a rabbit trail here? How many books have you read?
I think with the one that's coming out in October, The Lost Boys at Farley Theater, that would be number 10. And then the one I just turned in my editor today, which comes out next spring, that's the 11. So 11 plus 3 novellas and novella collections. So I guess you could say 14. Plus all the ones that you'll never read because they're so good. Really bad.
How long did you write before you got published?
I started writing, I wrote my first book when I was 13. Okay. And I've been published since 2016. What? I got the math. 8 years ago? 9 years ago? Right? So I got my mid-30s. So at least 25 years. In all honesty, I mean, it literally can take that long. Because you have to learn the craft of writing, you have to learn the story. You have to do a lot of reading and a lot of learning to other people. And you have to keep doing that too. I mean, there's so much I learned from other writers and through history and things like that, that you just want to apply your stories. So it's a long process. It's not fast. Be patient. Oh boy, it's still. Really close.
Most of your inspirations for your books off the top of your head happenings, or do you think of them like, oh, someday I wanna approach this?
Are you talking a story or a theme?
Oh,
Yeah, from a theme standpoint, there's lots of different themes I thought of that we each cover. And you kind of wait for a story to inspire which one you grab. As far as the story itself, sometimes I'm like, I know I want to write this story. Like the premonition at Wither's Farm, the chickens, stuff hiding in the chicken coop. That was just like an instant. Yeah, I'm writing this story. This is done. And then there's other ones where it's kind of like The Souls of Lost Lake is a story that it was a campfire story that my husband grew up hearing told, and it was told probably 17 different ways. And then when I retold it in the book, he said that's not how the story goes. I had to make up my own. Okay. And yeah, inspired me, right? So, you know, the other day we were at Myers, is it Myers? The butterfly place?
Yeah.
And I was like, that tree right there. Can you imagine being the janitor or whatever, and you come in to open the butterfly museum, place, right? And there's something hanging from the tree in the morning. Oh, the butterfly. That. Today, doing something else, up. And of course, it's just garbage on my dead body. I thought, right, you know, and and he thinks I'm weird. I said, dude, bucket list, find a murder victim. You know, someone has to die for that to happen. Like, yeah, well, we won't think about that. Bucket list, find a murder victim. They come from all over the place. So sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's something in history, sometimes it's literally a garbage bag inside.
Question mark, I'm looking at.
can you tell us a quick about your Sons of Bartle theory?
Oh, yeah, a lot, Joy Bartle Theater. That one was on October. That was actually set. So I live in Beverly, Wisconsin, which is the home of the Ringling Brothers. And Al Ringling built a theater in our hometown that was formed after the French theaters, like the European style. It's a beautiful theater. And there's a couple ghost stories around our theater in Beverly, which we call the Al Ringling Theater. One of the ghost stories is the ghost story of a woman in white who supposedly, during a performance, accidentally dropped her infant from one of the box seats. And to this day, supposedly, never happened to me. To this day, you can either catch a glimpse of the woman in white, or if you're wearing one of like these ear monitor things, there's some people to this day, like they're doing a play and they won't turn it on until the play starts because supposedly you'll hear a baby crying over the airwaves. And that's one story. The other story is the story of The theater, the way it was built, where it has all the seats underneath all the seats are, for lack of a better word, like ductwork. Okay, so there's miles and mazes of ductwork in this theater. And when it was built, there were some boys who went into the theater after the theater was closed one night, and they got lost in the ductwork. And funny enough, legend never tells us whether they were rescued, and supposedly they're still there. And you can still hear them pounding on the pipes or wailing or crying for their lives. So I thought, wouldn't that make a great story? So the Lost Boys of Barlow here has to do with the lost boys that get lost in the theater. And it starts out with a very annoying ghost hunting television show that comes to town that decides they want to feature this on television. During the ghost hunt, somebody actually vanishes. And so they start digging into the story from the past. And again, Scooby-Doo style, we all know that nothing is as it seems. So.
You had mentioned that you started writing when you were very young.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering how, as you've gone through different phases of your life, becoming an adult, getting married, having children, watching your children grow up, like how has that affected your writing process or your perspective on the stories that you're telling?
I think the standpoint of stories, that affected just, again, by reading history, watching movies, learning about how to tell a good story. I think what's been most affected by life changes is the spiritual elements of the story, and the different thematic elements. Because unfortunately, as you get older, you experience more trauma, more things that the Lord allows you to go through. And we can all list out the litany of things that have been difficult in our lives that have brought us to where we are today. And so I think that's where that's affected my writing the most, is tapping into actual personal experiences, emotions, and being vulnerable from the standpoint of, I don't personally believe, at least for my life, that God has called me to go through these certain things that I've gone through, like postpartum depression and 3 miscarriages and losing my mom and being in the ICU for a couple nights and not knowing who my children were, and just about traumatic health issues. I don't believe He's had me go through those to be quiet. I believe He's had me go through those. And this is my journey. I think it's different for everybody, so don't feel like I'm saying, oh, you have to blast your experience. So I think He has different stories for us. But I think because I'm writing, the Lord has said, hey, you've gone through these things, let's infuse them into your story. Yeah, it wasn't supposed to, I'm sorry. So let's infuse them into your stories, so that those experiences aren't wasted. And the things that the Lord teaches me through those experiences be something that I can put into the life of the character or put into the thread of the story so that other people can experience them along with me and ultimately not experience my experience, but experience what the Lord can do through that. And I'm very passionate about including that in my stories, but I also want to do it in an organic way where it's written into the book, not me standing up here telling you about Jesus. But you are experiencing real life characters and how God infuses you with Him where you're at. And sometimes, like in the situation with the dancing at Castle Moreau, you're going to have the main heroine wake up hungover, because that's where she's at. And it's a dark place. There's nothing glamorized about it. But I think sometimes we avoid those things because they're not of the Lord. And I'm not saying it's of the Lord, but the fact of the matter is it's real. And people struggle with that, and somehow they're affected by that. And if I write beautiful fiction, and there is a place for beautiful Christian fiction, do not get me wrong, there's a place for that. I don't feel it's my place. I really feel like I've been called to, in a sense, walk through the darkness. And that rawness, that hardness of life is so real that people who are in those places need to have fiction they can relate to see that God is also in those places. He's not just in the great places, right? He hangs out in the darkest places. He hangs out with the people who don't deserve him to hang with him. And those are the people that I want to be able to read fiction about. Oh, okay. So you may never see the word Jesus or the name of Jesus mentioned. I often refer to him as the creator, or as the Lord God. I want to be clear enough so it's not just so neutral that's your own. That's not what I mean either. But on the flip side, I want it to be meaningful, that it doesn't turn people away. And unfortunately, in today's culture, you throw out Jesus in the first book or the first chapter, and people put the book down. All right. I have a fan. I'm going to way past your question. But I have a reader or a fan or whatever you call her who started reading my books. She is a bona fide Wiccan witch, and she's not, to this day, to my knowledge, left the Wiccan faith. And she devours every single one of my books, and there's nothing Wiccan about them. And she has emailed me as recently as probably last year and said that her journey of faith is shifting because she's starting to see that God may not come in the form that she thought he did. And that maybe he's more personal to her than she first thought he was. And the language she used in that email from the first ones that I used to get from her was very different, because God wasn't really used. It was more, people who lead me, or the voices, or my spirit guides, or things like that. She would use those terms, and now she's shifting. And she mentioned the last time I heard from her, she said that she had lost most of her friends because she was starting to explore faith outside of the Wiccan religion. And she attributed that a lot to reading some of her books. And so that's the darkness. So why do I write where I tiptoe along those edges? It doesn't sit well with everybody, but she's the reason. It's those people who have been abused, or those people who just can't gag down that pretty roses of Christian fiction because it's too pretty. It's not believable to them. I read it because it's nice to escape into pretty fiction, honestly. I do. But some people, they just can't stomach it because they're like, the world is not beautiful. It's dark. But there's hope. That's what I hope it is. So.
Your mic is changing.
Was it my hearing?
Oh, it is. I think so. It's just there. It just was hitting your shirt.
That's fine. I thought it was in thunder. I'm sorry to take messages from God. That's what a hearing it was in the words.
So I actually am so excited. Thank you. It's Chloe, right? Yeah. Thank you so much for watching the Lost Confederate stuff. Because of that story, that super dark book came out about Cliff, the House of the Cliff. I'm excited for you. Thank you very much. You're my hero. Because that was the first book of yours that I read, because I'm now using you as my comp.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because it's very, very hard to break in as what I call ugly Christians, real people. It's like most of the Christian books that I tend to read. It's like, these aren't real people. I don't relate to these. I want to write for my kids. They're all in their 30s and they are tough cookies. So how hard was it for you because you kind of built your own niche. So how hard was it for you to find that niche, and who was your support group? How did you build your support group?
I think there's a couple of things that fall into place there. Honestly, Christian, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say Christian fiction is changing rather dramatically and quickly. There is a new generation of readers coming that are wanting more of the not real life, but real life, if that makes sense. Like, they still want to read to escape, but at the same time, they want a little bit of believability in the characters. So the face of Christian fiction is broadening and changing. not compromising, but broadening and changing to what they're explaining to you. Agree? Okay. I was like, I don't want to speak as an authority here. We'll just make Chris do that. Would you agree? So I think that was part of what happened is I gained the interest of Rayla, who was my first editor at Healthy House. And she's younger than me. And she was a younger editor. And so she, I think, had a different perspective on what she was wanting to see in different types of fiction. And she's one who introduced quite a few of the authors you see today, at least for Healthy House. Because she signed a lot of them. Well, she's moved into a different department now, but she's, I would say, one of the pioneers of the editors that started going to the publisher saying, we need to take a chance on this. We need to try this and see if it works, because we need more than just the different things that we have currently, which again, I'm not at all saying that they're less than or active. We love them, and many of them. But outside of that, really the cheerleaders came from other writers. In all honesty, Colleen Coble was the first person who ever gave me the idea of writing it full time. Without Colleen, I never would have done it. She was the one who, she knew the market, she could see things, she'd been in the world for a long time. She said, I just have a feeling this might become popular. You should write it full time. I'm like, well, what's that? And she's like, well, have you ever read nicer shape for the like, oh, okay, well, I can do that. I can't write that. That's not me. But I love watching cold case shows, forensic files, unsolved mysteries, unsolved crimes. I'm like, oh, that would be interesting. If you had like a crime from the past that affects the crime. And that's kind of where it went. And I pushed the envelope a little bit, but the House of Forest Hill. What's the title of my love? Foster. The House of Boston Hill really doesn't have ghostly elements at all. Neither does the Rocky Castle Moreau, which is the second one. I think I kind of started toying a little bit about the ghostly kind of creepy element when I got to the Curse of Misty Mayfair. And in fact, that title itself, I don't know if you can find it.
No, you're doing fine.
Okay,
I'm
but
watching.
that title itself, the Curse of Misty Mayfair, almost didn't pass through because up until that point, the word curse in its title threw up red flags in a Christian marketing world because curse can be taken a lot of different negative connotations and we're shortly burned. And I'm like, well, but the Bible talks about generational curses, right? And it talks about how the sins of the forefathers, or the sins of fathers, and like, so curse isn't always like a, it's another word that we use for different connotations. So they took a risk on it, and it works. And the elements of ghost and paranormal, as long as I don't cross over into, which I've never tried because I've never really intended to, as long as I don't cross over into like actual ghosts, meaning things really questionable, they've been really, really supportive of. So to answer your question, writers and publishers, and I do think that the Christian industry is seeing the need for that. I mean, generations are just requiring it.
Thank you. I think Bethany Books is kind of a forerunner also in bringing it outward.
Yeah, Bethany, Thomas Nelson's done that. And I know Barbara's been gone into that with some of their, I don't know, I mean, you're seeing a lot more, and it's not always the time when it's because it's more like this is Nelson. And you know, it's a podcast about a missing girl, and it's another over different time periods, but it's very it happens in the industry, but it's more of a women's fiction. It's emotional and spiritual angst of what you do with that. And then you have Nicole, the words you lost that's coming out stage and was Vanishing. And hers is a friend who passed away, and she has a lost manuscript. They have to find it. And that sounds like a great story, but when you hear of what the characters are going to experience and the trauma and the different things that they're going through, I love seeing those elements starting to play out in books. And even in young adult books and stuff, they're starting to out a lot more of that too. So I think it's exciting. I think it's good.